This is the Powered Up Podcast, show 169.
Welcome to a real-world education with insight and advice from teachers in the game, where current and former educators reveal what truly sets apart the great teachers and what it takes to make a positive impact on students. Whether you're in pre-service learning, new to the game, or a seasoned veteran, this is the show for you. You'll leave feeling inspired to take action because we are powering education by empowering you.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? This is Kennerman, host of the Powered Up Podcast, and I am here with my co-host, Mr. Christopher, printed out the show notes, Albrecht. Am I right?
Yes, I printed out the show notes this time. So I had them last show. I didn't have them. You know what I did? I've got them on a cell phone right now. I'm trying to save a little paper, but yep.
There you go. I love it.
And this is a dynamite show. This one coming up right here is a keeper.
Yeah, this is definitely going to be one of the most memorable conversations for sure. So what's it like being back in the saddle for your second round as co-host?
Oh, I loved it. This was a joy, and to get the opportunity to talk to a newly named National Teacher of the Year in Missy. It's just a real good chance to delve into a person that has a brilliant mind. A really pure interest in children and a passion for the profession of education. Anybody watching this next episode is going to absolutely love it, because I think looking back over the 168 or so episodes, this one is full of really good insight and passion and inspiration that'll make you really love the profession, especially if you're somebody sitting there after a bad day or something like that. This is going to be an uplifting program today.
I couldn't agree more. She brings such a unique mix of love and joy for teaching, as well as so much wisdom, so much knowledge, great pedagogy that she shares. And it's quite obvious why she was the Tennessee Teacher of the Year, and she's been named National Teacher of the Year. And, at this time I have different co-hosts that are coming on. And this is 3 weeks in a row where I feel like it was the perfect pairing of my guest co-host and the guests that we had, because there was so much of what she shared and the way she spoke and the way she reflected and just smiled about her classroom that I remember our first conversation was very similar in someone that has been in education for a long time and still maintains such a joy and love for teaching. And it's not just being overly positive, right? It's joy that's developed through effective teaching and through relationships with students and the communication with parents that she highlights as well in so many different ways. I think is so important, and highlighting how to work with EL or ESL students that, as you mentioned, we're all facing. I mean, I would have to imagine almost every school district in the country has more EL students than they had in the past. Now, maybe that's 5 from 0, or maybe that's 100 from 30, right? But I think we're all working with these students, and it's a really challenging population to work with, because you feel like it's just so hard to connect with them, and it's just so hard to provide them what they need, but they have so much potential, and you don't want to see that opportunity go to waste. And I think she really helps with thinking about the approach that we have with our students and helping them thrive and grow.
Yeah, I would have to agree with you. And the thing that the big takeaways that I'm thinking about when we talk about this has happened very recently, and the change has not been a gradual change where this influx has happened in a very short, 1, 2, 3 year time period for a lot of school districts or county school systems. And so that change and schools make decisions, but they don't make rapid changes. Big things don't happen fast. This is a big thing that is happening fast. So it's something that we really have to bring into the forefront of discussion right now. That's why it thrills me that we have a National Teacher of the Year right now with experience in this, because we're going to need that guidance as we work through this, because ultimately a lot of these kids are here not by their own circumstances, but by the circumstances of their family or their country, and they're falling victim to a move that they probably didn't want in the first place. So we got to make sure that we're world educators now. We're not just American educators anymore. We're world educators, and we're here to serve. What I took away from Missy's interview as well is she's a very service-minded person. And that's another reminder that service is at the core of every single teacher, every single administrator, anybody that works with children in a school district really has to have that. And that mindset's going to be so crucial going forward as we work with kids coming from different areas, as more and more people are moving on the move between schools throughout the world.
Absolutely. So I would love to just jump right into our conversation with National Teacher of the Year, Missy Testerman.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. You can find out more at teachbetter.com/podcasts. Now let's get back to the episode.
Hi, Missy. Welcome to the Powered Up Podcast. How you doing tonight?
Hey, Ken. I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. I'm really excited for this conversation. So please officially introduce yourself to our audience. Let us know where you are coming from and give us a snapshot of what your career in education has looked like.
Okay, my name is Missy Testerman. I am the 2024 National Teacher of the Year. I was also the 2024 Tennessee Teacher of the Year. I've spent 32 years in public education. I taught first and second grades for 30 years before adding an ESL endorsement, which in Tennessee is English as a second language. And I now teach English language learners in my hometown of Rogersville, Tennessee.
So spending all that time in primary classroom is definitely a special place to be. You know, those high school teachers cringe at the idea of that type of classroom. And even myself as a fifth grade teacher, my first job was a bulk of my career. My first job being second grade. It's a world of a difference. I'm curious, what are one or two core values that you've established over 30 years in a primary classroom that maybe was there from year one or slowly developed in the first few years of your classroom that has only carried over into your new position as ESL and even on the platform you have now as a state and national teacher of the year? What are some of those core values that you think are just tried and true to you that have just allowed you to connect with students and maintain a positive and successful classroom for your students?
I feel like in my case, it has been from the beginning knowing how to build relationships, not just with students, but also with students' families, so that parents know that you're on their side and you want the best for their children also. I also am very, very deliberate about the fact that we must get children's literacy right. And we must get it right from the beginning when they're young. There is no magic age when kids suddenly begin reading. So that involves real explicit reading instruction from the beginning so that we ensure that our kids have the reading skills so that they're able to succeed in all academic areas.
Chris, you're big on family and communication.
Oh yeah. That's I agree 100% that what you're saying, Missy. In terms of your communication, what could you run us through, like what general, just as a classroom teacher, you've got a great platform now as a National Teacher of the Year, but one of the things that I'm really loving right now is that you still are in the classroom. I mean, it centers us. So talk a little bit about some of the families down in Tennessee. You're in rural Tennessee. I know up here in Rochester, New York, we have a huge Ukrainian population coming in now. They don't speak English. And we also have a migrant population coming out of Mexico. So we've got a lot of Spanish speaking students. What are you looking at down there? And then how do you attack literacy? Or how do you approach literacy, especially at that early childhood level when we're talking about the language acquisition device being so rich in kindergarten, first grade, second grade? How are you attacking it from different angles of, when you've got multiple languages coming into your program?
Absolutely. So my students actually come from 4 different language backgrounds: Spanish, Gujarati, Chinese, and Arabic. And some come in already being able to read in the native language. Some come in with absolutely no reading skills at all. Some come in having struggled in the home language due to an interruption in schooling, especially post COVID, especially in the countries from Central America. So basically, you do like you just do in the regular classroom. You figure out where they are. You meet them with trying to get spoken English, immerse them as much you can into hearing the language while also trying to teach some of those alphabetic principles. But the thing that I've found to be most successful is just starting with I need a pencil, I need a book. And that seems to really open the language. Once they have that one core sentence, I need a, they can point out anything. They can go to their teacher and say, I need a, and point to a water bottle. And that allows them to get those communication skills first and foremost. And then they're so excited that they begin to say it all day long, even when they don't necessarily need anything. They're just excited that someone understands them.
That's wonderful. So the community that surrounds you, then, your English speaking rural Tennessee residents that are going to school there, how are the kids? Are they embracing this? Are they, are the kids learn? Is it reciprocal is what I guess I'm asking. Or does your program delve into some of the, like you were talking about, maybe speaking Mandarin, Chinese? Is it reverse where the kids that are English speaking are picking up from the kids that are speaking a different language?
They try, and they will hound, especially my new speakers. How do you say this? They'll use Google Translate. And in the beginning, when I get a new student, a newcomer, sometimes I'll have to go into their regular classroom and give the whole, please don't bother them all day. They're trying to learn our language, because all day long they send them messages, please, or not even please, just how do you say this? How do you say that? So my area is predominantly white, since it's rural Appalachia, but in my school we've been able to build this really healthy, welcoming community, not just with my students but also with their families. Occasionally there will be some unpleasant situations, but I typically handle those head on. I've taught there a long time. I've lived there my whole life, so I probably know the name of every kid in my school, and I probably know their parents. And I think that helps build those relationships that my students and their families are just like everyone else. My families want their kids to do well. My students want to do well and to be part of our community in a positive way.
Okay.
How do you help? I know from experience and just thinking out loud here that allowing and helping our all of our students feel welcome, feel safe, feel happy to be in school is such an essential quality to carry in our classrooms. But with our ESL or EL students, even more so, there's so much that we can't communicate verbally to them to make them feel that way. For the very simple fact, on the first day of school, I always told my students, I want you to feel safe, welcomed, and happy to be here. Well, that's not going to work with students that aren't understanding the language that I'm speaking. So what are some things that you do right out of the gate to make them feel safe and feel comfortable to be in your school, in your classroom? And then is there anything that you're explicitly, or maybe that your students are implicitly picking up on to also help those students feel safe and feel welcomed in the classroom, to really help build that community right out of the gate when they're coming in with potentially no language skills to understand what you're saying?
A lot of times when I receive a new student, and I did this in the general classroom as well, but I will go into their classroom and find a buddy, someone that I know, a child that will be a good little mama hen or a good little buddy, and I'll explain they're going to need help at lunch. They don't know how to get the lunch tray. And it's really amazing. Kids get really resourceful and inventive, and I never have any trouble with those things. Some kid has always helped out. I always try to go to the cafeteria the first day, because for my children, that's probably the scariest environment. The classroom is pretty controlled. The cafeteria is not. And so I will try to get down there when they go so that I can go through the lunch line with them and kind of aid the process. But there have been times where I've gotten tied up and haven't made it, and the child has gotten through the lunch line. They have food. They have, a bunch of other kids sitting around them just wanting to, to love on them and engage them in as much of belonging as they can, even though they don't have any language skills.
So, okay, so that's a great point. So we're starting to move into that area of where there's not direct instruction, where there's that you have to be on your own, a lunchroom or a playground like that. Places we have to be alone are in our homes. How do you navigate the communication barrier between families too? Because if their children don't necessarily speak the language, I know from at least our experience up here in Rochester, the families aren't. How do you engage families that are really struggling to understand this new? It might even be a new school system, that schools are run differently. I'm just like you. I'm first generation. I had a father that came from another country, so school to him was much different than school here in America. How do you bridge that gap with families? Because I noticed that seems to be, from what I've understood, that seems to be a very key element of your pedagogy.
A lot of times I get lucky and the family will move in and they will have someone locally who is a language mentor for them. But most of the time that does not happen, and they just show up in our office. And so I handle the entire registration process. A lot of times I rely on an app to translate if there is such a language barrier. If I know they're coming ahead of time, it makes it easier. I can go ahead and text them messages to prepare them. I do translate documents to go home, and I do use a translation app. Now, it is accurate by and large. Some of the things are quite comical, because I will get replies back from a parent that make no sense. Whenever I was named when I was named a finalist for National Teacher of the Year, I got this really sweet text from one of my mamas thanking me for everything I'd done for her little family. She had an older child and a younger child, but the text started by saying, "Congratulations for nothing." Well, I know she did not mean that. I know she didn't. But so the app is not, completely foolproof, but I make a point to touch base with them about important things going on in their classroom, going on in our school, especially, you mentioned how school is run. We miss a lot in rural Tennessee for snow, not because we have snow, but because we might have snow and we're not prepared to deal with it. And one of the things I found real quickly doing this job is, if I do not explicitly, because our school does a cast call where they call and relay the information, sends a text. But if I don't send one on the app that I use that translates it into the home language, they will show up to school anyway. So that's one of the things that I have to do. And most families, they're like every other family. They're just happy to see a smiling face. They're happy that their child is excited to come to school. The first few days, I will go and get them out of the car in the morning and walk them in until they're comfortable doing that themselves. And I think that's reassuring to parents. It's not just dropping them off at the door and letting them go into this world where they can't communicate. They know that I'm there, and that gives them a feeling of reassurance, just like it gives the kid a feeling of reassurance.
And I think that constant communication helps in so many facets. And what you were saying about the mistranslation with specific words, sometimes it's context too. Mm-hmm. And so we were working with a student in our school this year, and there was a conversation about grade 1 and first grade and year 1. And all of those mean very different things to the parent. Year 1 is essentially kindergarten, right? But the idea of talking about this student moving to first grade versus it was very confusing for a moment, but the teacher had established really consistent quality communication with the parent that eventually we kind of navigated and figured out that confusion. But when you're not communicating with families on a regular basis, those confusing moments become more detrimental or just harder to overcome. So you've mentioned communication a lot with families. It was one of the first things that you said as one of your core values. I'm curious if you can kind of dig back into the archives, and maybe it never happened, but was there ever a moment where you had to communicate with parents because maybe something bad happened in school, or you had a student that was struggling, or something that wasn't a moment of shining positivity, and you had to communicate with the parents, and in the moment or reflecting later, and Christopher, if you have a story that aligns to this as well, I'd love for you to share it. Did you ever have a moment where you sat back and realized that I haven't communicated with this parent enough and it's making this moment harder? If I had established more communication proactively before this moment, this would have been an easier conversation to have. Did you ever have a moment with like that, maybe earlier in your career, that even set that communication trajectory on a different level?
I did. As a young teacher, I'm thinking of one situation where I had a child who was struggling, and it was really difficult to get the parent to come in. I feel like the mom likely understood that he was struggling and just, didn't want to face it, which is an entirely normal reaction. But I get her in, and the topic that we're discussing is retention, and it's February. And despite my best efforts, I had not met with her all year. So it was a very contentious conversation from the beginning, but it was helpful to me because I pledged that day that from now on, I would do something even before school started to meet my parents in a non-threatening environment. So for a long time, my grade level peers and I would do a popsicle party prior to the beginning of school. We would not even meet at school. We would meet at the local park, and we would have popsicles, and there wasn't a presentation. We did have like the child's folder full of all the paperwork that needed to be completed. That way, if parents wanted to get a head start on it, they could. And what it did was that it allowed us to have those conversations with parents in a very non-threatening way. We didn't know anything about the child academically or behaviorally yet. So the conversation was able just to flow from what kinds of things does your child like? Is your child excited to come back to school? And that's a tradition that my school has actually carried on. We try to meet parents and to meet students before the school year starts. It just helps build excitement, and it helps us build a relationship with parents and families.
I would agree with you, Missy. We do a very similar thing. We have a meet and greet day. I like the idea of the popsicles and outside of the school environment because it puts us on neutral ground and takes away that challenge, the proactive approach of having a non-threatening conversation and getting to know each other. So if we have successes, we can celebrate, not too high. And if we have challenges, we don't, go down too low, that we always constructively working together. I agree. Building those foundations are huge. Missy, go back over your career. I'll go the other direction. Ken, you went the direction of a challenging one. Let's go now into the present tense. And, here we are 3 years into a really neat ESL change in your career. It's amazing to me that you went about 26, 27 years, and now you've suddenly changed. Give us a great narrative of one really successful student right now that you're really proud of, that you're saying, wow, that was almost a transformative moment, not just for that student, but for me as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually spent 30 years in the regular classroom. It's been a long,
it's amazing. That's
a
that's
long
that's
time.
going to become a milestone that not a lot of people are going to be saying in the future. So that's congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. I can't imagine doing anything else. And I do empathize with people who've lost the joy of teaching along the way. I've just been lucky not to be one of them. But I think of that situation, it was my daughter's age group of kids. So I was teaching second grade, and I got this little boy who was from Korea. Our town recruited a Korean-based factory to come in, and so we had like 17 Korean children come into our pre-K through 8 school, which was, a large number. But the factory brought a lot of good jobs to our community, and was just such a blessing. It was during the recession of like 2008-9, during rough times, and they infused our area with a lot of nice paying jobs with good benefits. But he comes in, and this is like November. He has no English skills, none whatsoever. His mom is terrified the first day, and the only 2 words she was able to say were, "My baby." Well, of course, that like tore at my heart, and so I was doing the I will take care of your baby thing. But by the end of the year, he was not only, a great speaker, a great ESL student, he was just a top student. And he actually ended up being the valedictorian of my daughter's graduating class. And so at graduation, he told the story that I had told him later in life, that when he first came to us, he knew only 1 word in English, no. So he said it all day. Even if he didn't mean no, he still said no, because he was so proud that he knew that word. And when I look at him, he's in dental school at USC now, and he's done so well. But every time I see him, I'm flashed back to that little 7-year-old standing there, big wide eyes, absolutely petrified. But a little bit of a funny story. I had a child in my classroom who was the son of a coworker, and I've told her before that I've asked permission to tell this story, and she thinks it's funny too. But his name was Kyle. Well, all day long, Kyle liked to talk. He had a lot to offer because he was incredibly smart. But a lot of times he would try to talk over me, and I would say, "Kyle, shh, Kyle, shh." So this child, this little Korean boy, goes home and tells his mom that he knows the word for be quiet, and it is Kyle. And so then in our classroom, he starts saying, when it gets loud, he starts saying anytime, "Kyle, Kyle." And so finally I realized he's saying that because he thinks it means, to be quiet. He didn't understand that was someone's name. But those 2 became the best of buddies because Kyle thought that he was talking to him all day long.
That's funny.
That's so funny.
So what were so key elements? We're facing a huge influx of change in our country right now in terms of people coming into school districts. I don't think any district is not going to feel the effects of immigration, people fleeing other countries, refugees. What were the key steps? Go back to that student that's now at USC, that's now in dental school. What were the key foundations? So if we had to pick out 5 or 6 areas, I've been through everything from ACEs to developmental assets over my career, which you probably have too. I'm considering all the ways we've measured, like what promotes success. What specifically promoted success in that one young man to go on to dental school at USC and be valedictorian of his class, having coming in knowing only the word no?
Well, very high expectations from the parents. Even though he spoke no English, they still expected him to be the top of my class. At that time, we had an outstanding ESL teacher who was with us for 15 years. I actually took her job. When she came to me and told me that she was leaving, that's when I pursued coursework to get certified, because I was worried about who would advocate for our families. But she also had very high expectations. We started where he was, and he was intrinsically motivated, not going to lie. He had an innate drive for competitiveness. He was going to be the best, but probably just the fact that there were such high expectations for him and that he wanted to learn. He also was already, and this is very important, he was very literate in his home language. He could already read very well in Korean. And what we know is that those kids tend to have an easier time picking up reading, writing, speaking the language. So, a lot of times when I have a kid who's struggling, even with my extra help and the extra help of the classroom teacher and other school support, and they're struggling, and I have that conversation with the parent, how did they do before? A lot of times what I find out is that they struggled even in the home language. So there's a definite correlation, but he was already quite literate in Korean, which was an advantage for him.
So I'm going to ask you the $1 million question then. How do you get parents? And this is the question that I think we're facing across America, maybe the whole world. How do we get parents to raise that expectation level? And I know you talked about communication right there, and very similar. I think great educators do communicate proactively. But how do we get parents that are, especially you're in rural Appalachia right now. I started my career in West Virginia in Appalachia,
Okay.
so we have a couple things in common. I know about rural poverty and lack of experience and in the global scheme of things. How do you get parents to have that vision of a higher expectation to promote their kids and empower their kids to believe in themselves to go further?
That's very hard, and that's a challenge of generational poverty, whether you're in rural Appalachia or you're in urban areas. I always try to let them know your child has so much potential. They could go anywhere and do anything. If they want to live in Rogersville and raise a family here, great, but they don't have to. They can go out somewhere else in the world. I think it's a little easier for me because I have adult children who have graduated from college and gone into the world. So I have that experience to draw upon, that my son majored in a major that I'd never heard of, until he got to college and changed his major. And so I think it's changing that mindset. But like you said, that's very challenging. A lot of times those families that are kind of caught in the generational poverty trap, the parents also struggled. And the parents are down on themselves, not just their educational abilities, but also just their abilities, as a parent and so forth. So a lot of times it's also building up that parent. You're doing a great job and that kind of thing. I think that's very, very important in our situation.
How do you get a staff to also raise the level of expectations for the children and for the parents and for themselves? And where's the line between high expectations, rigorous classrooms, and teachers that just assign a lot of work? Because
Right.
it's very different, and assigning a lot of work is not rigor and is not raising expectations. So how do we as professionals or create rigorous classrooms with those high expectations for students that translates into parents seeing that and translates into a school with higher expectations and higher levels of rigor for students, where they need to uh, gain and build those assets to then have the ability to go anywhere and be anything that they want to be?
That's a great point, Ken. You can't just throw out hard things that are impossible for kids to do. That's not rigor. That's just frustration. So you have to start where they are and challenge them, but give them just the support to meet the next step, and then just keep pushing and pushing and pushing. And that's when progress takes place. My school is a Title I school, and feet outside of our door, there's a public housing project that's probably been there 70 years. But my school, through the years, through the advocacy of our teachers, as well as high expectations, has managed to help several students move out of that. I now know doctors and lawyers, a pilot, an engineer, a plumber, who came out of that housing project because our school believed in them and their parents believed in them. And that's difficult, I think, especially when you have people with a lot of classroom experience who were of that mindset leave. It's sometimes hard to replace that mindset, because I think that mindset has to be grown. I think a lot of new teachers, they're like I was. They're just trying to survive through the day and get the lesson taught. And I'll be honest, I didn't think about rigor or what necessarily, like, how it went. I was just trying to get the lesson taught. And I think that's entirely normal. But having that balance of career experience in your building is really important. The research says that our schools are best when there's a good mix of new teachers, mid-career teachers, and veteran teachers. But if we have all that wisdom walk out the door, or we have mid-career people who hop over into another field because they need to make more money, you're going to change that mindset in your building and that culture. And that has, I will be honest, that has been a challenge, not just for my school, but for a lot of top achieving schools in the state of Tennessee.
Sure.
And so, go ahead, Chris.
Oh, it makes total sense. Go ahead.
So give me an example in your first or second grade classroom of something that displays rigor and not necessarily just more work for kids.
Okay. All right. So I'll start with writing. Writing is probably
Perfect.
the hardest thing that any teacher at any level teaches. I have a great second grade co-teacher that I actually taught with for about 15 years, and she has my second graders, and we talk all the time that you feel like you've finished a marathon by the time the writing lesson is done. So you start where they are, you challenge them to do a little more. Listen, I need you to do this. Why don't you add an extra sentence? Let's put the word because and give some evidence in it until that becomes automatic. When that becomes automatic, then we'll move on to doing more powerful words or doing things in a series or more than one idea. So for me, probably writing is one of the places where you do see that improvement fast, because kids pick up on it if they're doing it every day. The problem is that it's so difficult. It's hard for teachers to maintain that energy level to want to do it every day. But if they will, the payoff is immense in terms of that child's ability and what that child is able to do.
And then that mindset of overcoming rigor applies to more subjects, more situations for the students. Chris, do you have an example of something that you think displays rigor? Maybe a fourth grade class.
I'm going to go more with not as explicit, but I agree with Missy. One of the things that I've noticed, and I always relate it to an art museum, you can't, when you pick up a book and you read a book, and you don't know if it's good writing or not good writing, if it's a really good story, unless you've written first. And it's almost like going into an art museum. Until you've picked up a paintbrush and tried to paint in oils, you really don't appreciate the fine strokes of an oil painting, just like you don't appreciate the metaphorical language, the word, the voice, the word choice, the dialect that's used by the author, until you've actually struggled through trying to write it yourself. So I think, Missy, I like how you're jumping off and kicking off. Almost, I know you're looking at reading instruction, but it seems like you're looking, am I correct in saying that you're looking at it through a lens of writing first before reading, because you have to go through the struggle of understanding language before you really can read it and fully embrace what language is giving you?
Right. And I told my first and second graders, and I tell my English language learners, anything that you can say, you can write. Yeah. We can figure out, there are a lot of tools we can use with our young writers. We use we call it a writing words dictionary, and it's an alphabetical list of words that kids commonly use. So if they're writing and they need to know how to spell the word want, they can look in that little dictionary, find the word want, because typically they can read it before they can spell it. And it just gives them a greater sense of independence. But Chris, when you were talking, I was thinking just last week I had pulled out a group of second graders that my English language learners were in, and I had some of their peers in there as well. And we couldn't make it much more than a sentence because they were yelling out, "That's a conjunction. You can't start a sentence with a conjunction," because their teacher had pointed that out, and she had told them, that's not appropriate to start your sentences with and, but, or. So when I took them back, I was like, well, they know conjunctions. And she said, "Oh, I'm so sorry." And I said, no, it was joy in my heart that they had picked up on that. They remembered it, and they were able to, to apply it to someone else's writing, that, hey, that got by someone's editor or proofreader, because you don't start a sentence with a conjunction.
No.
Do you do anything different or special to help the students see the joy in writing, whether it's through sharing with peers, with parents, or how do you get them to see writing as something that can create joy for themselves or others, and not just become a task where they have to write 5 sentences to get a check mark?
We do a lot, and we did when I was in the general classroom. We do a lot of sharing. Every time my children write anything, and this also applies to those teachers that I worked with in the general classroom, they read it back to an adult or they read it back to a peer. So it's not just write it, put it up. It is literally every single time sitting down and doing a quick conference with that child. It doesn't mean hitting everything in that conference because no one is superwoman, but it does let the kids know that they're heard. And something that our kids used to love to do was we would each line up at the door with our journals, and we would let them pair off with a buddy. You go with this person, you go with this person, and they would sit out there and read their journals to each other. And that was always, we called it the second grade story swap, which was kind of cheesy, but they would beg to do that again because they love sharing their writing with other people. And that's an important part. You have to have a purpose to write. None of us write, I don't think, just to be writing. There's a reason deep inside there. It's for you to read, it's to share with someone else, but there's a reason that most of us do writing.
Towards the end of my career, towards the end of her life, I got to work with Beverly Cleary. And Beverly Cleary, dear soul, 140 years old on this earth. And Beverly said, just come up with an idea and run with it. And sometimes we over push the creative side of kind of compartmentalizing creative writing. And sometimes we just need to let it flow. One of the things I'm hearing in you saying, Missy, is that, letting students read each other's writing, it is a very powerful tool. You're looking at it through a second grade lens, I think back through your career. At a fourth grade lens, we can teach it to be more independent, where we do a gallery walk where those journals are left on the table and they can move from person to person to person, kid in the room. And then they can leave sticky notes behind on thoughts. And we talk about not to be offended by a criticism, and also to be humble in getting a compliment and what that really means. So behavior really does play into being successful in writing, right? And the mindset of, okay, I just want to become a better writer and do it as more of a community, almost like a PLC. And as adults, it's like a young kid's PLC.
Yes, that's awesome.
And I think sometimes one of the struggles that comes with writing from an instructional standpoint is everything feels heavy from a time perspective. Time to, one, give them time to write. And then, like you said, Missy, about conferencing and feeling like you want to help and fix so much. And then time to let them share with their peers, and time for feedback and time to implement feedback. And I think the two examples that you just gave, and there's just small shifts that you can do in how you are finishing the writing piece or where you're doing the writing that can change it. When technology became a little bit more apparent in my classroom, I transitioned a lot of our writing assignments into discussion boards in Google Classroom, especially those writing activities that were more of a short prompt, short response, and then encouraging and facilitating an environment where students learned how to read. They learned how to appropriately make comments in response to their peers, but it became a platform where their writing was more naturally available to read. And it wasn't another thing in my classroom. It just became where we did some of our writing. Another strategy I started using is almost any writing assignment, especially when they were spending a little bit more time on, part of the rubric was filled out by their parents, and part of their grade was graded by their parents. And so they had to take it home. The rubric was very explicit for what the parents had to fill out, and it became another audience member, and it lightened my workload, right? It was something that brought the family into the classroom and also was one more thing off of my plate. I could then, when I read the student's report, I could also look at the parents' reflection and the parents' score of the rubric and see what they thought and how my reflections compared, or even having the parent and a peer fill out a rubric before it came to me. So just adding those layers in, that doesn't necessarily add more time to the classroom, but gives the students that audience piece. And then, like you said, Chris, teaching them how to take feedback, how to not be offended, how to utilize that in a positive way, or to read it, respect it, but ignore it. Like, you have that creative right as the writer to say, that's a good idea, but I think I want to stick with my idea. But all of those layers just allow it to become so much more of a rich process in the classroom.
One of the things that I do with my newcomers is that we do a dialogue or a journal back and forth. They write on a topic at home. I give them like a little box of vocabulary words that when they talk about the topic that I think they'll need. And then the next day we read over it and do some conferencing, and then I write back. And the sweetest thing happened. I had a little girl from Honduras, and not only did she write, but her mother began to write in English. And it's like the first time it was so touching, because it was just simply the first time I love. And the child did, I love a dog, I love a cat, the really predictable things. And the mom wrote, I love my, and the name of the child. And I can remember like the child looking at me so quizzically, because I had these big tears, in my eyes. But the mom began to practice every night as well, because a lot of times my students are the translators. They are the ones who are the language models for their parents. They do a lot of very adult tasks because someone in the home has to do it, whether it's making doctor's appointments, whether it is talking to the clerk at Walmart or things like that. But that was incredibly touching. And she moved recently, and I let her keep the journal. And I hope that that's something that they can look back on. It wasn't just the child's journey, it was also the mom's journey to beginning to read in English as well.
That's amazing.
One of the things that I'm thinking of right now too is differentiation, and the ability to, when you do written feedback or you have conferencing does take time. We've discovered a lot of programs now where, Ken, you mentioned that you're going into more of an online platform and sharing writing online. We now have the ability to record our voices talking about the writing and highlight in different colors. And so I can highlight on there and then have all simultaneous. I can do all my work outside of the school day with that, and then have the kids listen to it all simultaneously, and then do a feedback. They do their own evaluation of their own work, and then they read it back the next time they write on a similar topic. So it's really teaching that reflective process, especially when you've got kids that are struggling versus kids that are in a foreign language situation, or kids that are really excelling. You can break it down very easily when you're just talking. They love to hear their teacher's voice as opposed to just typing back to them. Hearing that voice in their ear is usually a very endearing thing. There's a very close relationship. That relationship between a teacher and a student is about as close as a parent is to a student, and it's something that's lifelong. I've always wondered, we go through 183 days of school. How does a kid remember you 40 years later with this endearing feeling? There's something magical about that teacher-student relationship that I know, Missy, I've already seen quite a few pieces that you have, those enduring relationships that just keep going years later. And especially living in a small community in rural Tennessee, I would feel that, those are very crucial to the culture of your community.
Absolutely. And those are the things that for me keep the joy there. I was checking out at the grocery store not long ago, and the little guy who was bagging my groceries starts singing the 13 Colonies song that he learned in second grade. And so it's those little things that hit at your heart, because they grow up so much through the years. And especially when you teach a primary grade, they go through that thing in middle school where you still have 3 or 4 who come hug you, but a lot of them, kind of outgrow that. Yep. They will kind of smile at you or something in the hallway. So when you have those moments, it's just incredibly special.
How do you, and this is again a question maybe for both of you, with your experience that you have, and I know Chris firsthand from the times that we've spoken, and Missy, it's blatantly obvious that you both have just a genuine love and joy for teaching and the relationships that you form with students and with parents. So as maybe younger teachers listening to this, or teachers, hitting that halfway mark of a potential 35 year career, how do you not lose that? What is it about the way you start the year, the way you interact with students? Is there anything other than it just being a core part of your heart? Because I feel that too. Like that is, so just for some context for you, Missy, I taught fifth grade for a long time. And for the last 4 years, I've been working as an instructional coach, which has been a good opportunity. And actually, I work in our secondary school, so I get to see a lot of the students that I've had, and it's kept that joy going. But right now, I'm working as an interim elementary principal, and I've been there for 4.5 months now. And that love and joy for the kids and for the families and for the classroom has exploded again. It's so much different than being in a more of a curricular position. How do you not lose that? What is there anything special or key that teachers can do and think about to maintain that joy and not become a burnout or resentful teacher?
I think that, like for me, a lot of that comes down to being able to manage your own happiness outside of the school day. When you have a problem, you need to have a plan to advocate for solutions to the problem instead of just stewing on it and complaining with other people. I think you have to take care of yourself, no matter what that is, whether it's exercising, whether it's extra sleep. And for me, I've been lucky. I teach in a pre-K through 8 school. So if our students are here the whole time, we actually get to keep them 10 years. And to get to see kids grow up during that time is just incredible. I feel incredibly lucky. And as my own children got older, I think I appreciated that I worked with little kids because I didn't have little kids at home. And I think that for me has been part of it. And that's a tricky balance. I think if we could answer that question and we could prevent a way for teachers to avoid, we could prevent teachers getting burnout, that we'd see teachers who stay longer and who have that wisdom still in the classroom. And a lot of that goes back to teacher workload. Our teachers are straddled with so much work, and a lot of times there are new things put on and nothing old is taken off, and it just becomes very, very burdensome to them.
Yeah. I 100% agree. You have to surround yourself with teachers that think like you, that share the same ideas and the same passions. You're going to always, whether it's in business or whether it's in, my wife's in business and I'm in education, and you're always going to have somebody in that environment that's not going to be, they could be corrosive. You just don't allow yourself to go down that rabbit hole with them, and they'll challenge you to, but you just don't go to those places. There's a self-discipline. It's even like there's evenings, you get, I'm sure even a National Teacher of the Year would say this, that there's evenings where I don't want to make that phone call. I'm tired. I've had enough today. But you don't allow yourself to put something aside. I think once you start getting into those bad habits, sometimes what happens is you allow yourself to then continue those bad habits. So there is a self-discipline to staying positive through a whole career, because the final outcome. But Missy, you're 100% correct too. You have to take care of yourself, and that is a really big challenge that I think us that are further down the career right now and where we're at. I'm at my 29th year, Missy, you're in your 30s now. That we need to impart on to the younger teachers that it is okay to go home. It's time. There is a point to go home. You're newly married right now. You have to work on your marriage right now, or your younger kids. Ken, right now you have 4 kids under the age of 6, and you're going into an administrative position. You'd be my biggest worry right now, because administration can really, really be long hours. And it's so vital to your personal happiness to spend time with people that are your blood, they're your children and your wife. And so for you to be happy at school, Missy's right. You have to be happy with your life. You really do. And work does not have to define you. So like when somebody says, "What are you?" I could just easily say I'm a teacher, but I could also say that I'm a runner, and I just as easy. You don't have to let your job identify. Even though we're passionate about teaching, we're allowed to be passionate about other things too and talk about those things. Give yourself grace to do that.
Absolutely. I've said this so many times before, but I think it's so important for teachers to set boundaries and to define those boundaries.
Yeah.
And circling all the way back to the communication piece that we started this conversation with, telling your parents what your boundaries are. I told my parents I don't check email after I leave at about 4:15. And if you have a problem with homework, just write a note and say, homework was a problem. Tommy didn't do his homework tonight. That's fine. That's not what's important when the kids are going home. I think it's and it's not to say that no one should check their email, but be clear on what the expectation is. So parents knew if they emailed me at 8:00, they would hear from me at 7 a.m. when I got to work early. There wasn't going to be a response that night. And I think that's even harder now because our phones might have email, or you might have Seesaw or Schoology or Canvas or whatever LMS that you're using. And it's so easy to be connected, but it doesn't mean you have to be connected. You can disable apps for periods of time, right? You can lock them from 4:00 to 8:00. And so setting those boundaries for yourself, I think is so key. And honestly, Christopher, that's like the only thing that's allowing me to not be overburdened right now with this new position I'm in is I really worked hard at that as a teacher when it was easier and as a coach when it was easier. And it's kind of helped me not lose that in my current position. So Missy, I loved this conversation. I could talk to you for hours and hours, but I want to be aware of our time, and I want to jump into our exit ticket, which are the same 4 questions we ask every guest every week. Question number 1, what is the best thing a teacher can do to make a student school experience better?
I think forming that relationship with the child and the student, letting them know that you're on their side, but that you also have high expectations. And sometimes there's an element of tough love in that. I love you enough that I want you to do this well because you're going to need to know to do it in the next grade and from here on out. So I think that having high expectations while also giving support at the same time is incredibly crucial, no matter what age of the student.
Missy, you're a National Teacher of the Year now. You're a State Teacher of the Year now. You're going to be asked for advice left and right, and you're going to be asked your opinion on things. But I'd like you to think back to a colleague, a parent, another teacher, a student that gave you advice at one time. What was a key piece of advice that someone gave you along the line that had a formative or a transformative thing for you?
I actually had the world's best mentor teacher ever. She was a lady named Mary Jo, and we taught first grade together. Basically, I knew nothing when I walked in that classroom, and she grew me. But one of the things that she said to me right off the bat was, "You need to chill out," because I was so tense with high expectations for my kids and me that no one was having any fun whatsoever. I was absolutely taking the joy out of teaching, out of learning, because I was so focused on having that lesson follow that direct script, and we can't talk about this because that's going to take time away from doing this. And I know it's really cool that red and blue makes purple, but we do not have time for this now. And through the years I learned that that's the best learning are those accidental things that happen, those inquiry based things that show kids, how they work. But that was just such an amazing advice. You need to chill yourself out. And I did need to chill myself out. And I've reacted to like crazy things. Like I had first graders and I would go ballistic if they, not ballistic, but I would be upset if they lost their spelling list. Well, fast forward now and we send that thing out by text, we send it out by email, we send pictures of it. And really, did all of that matter? I was trying to make first graders act like they were high school seniors. So she stepped in, and I think that's part of the reason that I developed this joy for teaching, because I'm not sure that I had it in the very beginning, because it was such a stressful situation.
Great advice. Oh, I've got another one.
There you go.
Okay, so back to back. Okay, we know how the school year goes in waves. Those days or weeks that we struggle to survive. What is something that every educator needs to hear to power up that moment of struggle? So when somebody's and every educator can relate to this. There are some days that you just walk away and you're kind of shaking your head thinking, oh my gosh, what have I got myself into? How do you get past those struggling days and build yourself back up?
I think sometimes you just have to walk out the door that day. It's better if you've had a really bad day. Don't stay and work a whole bunch that day. It will all be there the next day, or it has been for me. No one has ever come in 32 years and done my work for me. It was still there the next day. And I think that goes back to taking care of yourself. You mentioned running a minute ago, Christopher. Maybe running is the magic bullet. I think that helps you manage stress in a positive way. It doesn't have to be running. It can be going for a walk. It can be playing with your grandchildren, those things. You've got to find your joy cannot all be tied to school. It has to come from places outside of school as well.
It's
I
true.
love that. So it's easy to fall into facilitating a repetitive classroom. What separates the teachers who are the ones constantly seeking to change, innovate, and adopt new teaching strategies?
That's a really excellent question. I think if you put student learning at the focus, you're always willing to keep learning yourself. And that's why if new technology comes along that does something better than you can, or if a new method comes along that does something better than you were doing, when you have student learning at the focus, you're going to be more willing to try those ideas and change with the times, because nothing's going to stay the same. If you spend, a 30-year career in education, nothing is going to stay the same that it was. So you have to be adaptive. You have to be open to being a lifelong learner yourself.
Agreed. Missy, I'm going to go a little bit. Ken, I apologize. I'm going to go a little bit off, but I'm very curious. I'm going to go a little bit off the script. Missy, the part of my experience as a state teacher of the year, you're going through a state teacher of the year experience as well. At the end of the year, we have something called Next Steps. I think we were down in Princeton. I don't know where your guys are, where your cohort's going to wind up at. Where do you see, you have your year of advocacy, but I do know this from National Teachers of the Year and my own experience within my state, that you continue to be an advocate for the profession. If you were to, just magically think into the future and your ideal situation, how do you want to, be seen 5 years from now? Has it having impacted? You've got a tremendous platform right now. What do you want to see your impact, your personal impact be 5-10 years into the future?
I hope that my impact after my year of service is that I managed to empower teachers to advocate for their students, their profession, and their careers. I think for a long time we told teachers in terms of policy, just, shut your door and teach. Don't get involved in the politics and the decision making. You're going to make life hard on yourself. Well, the reality is that the people who are making the policies that affect education and affect our students are not teachers. They're not experts.
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like that we have to speak up. We have to celebrate the good things, the triumphs, but I feel like as well we have to tell what's not working and what we're struggling with and what we need help with. So I hope to be able to send that message to teachers, not just this year, but even after I don't teach anymore. I want to be, that person that says you've got to speak up. You have to find your own voice for your own sake and also for the sake of your students and your overall school culture.
Right. So Missy, this has been a wonderful, I've really enjoyed this time with you, and Ken. In terms of the future, how do people get in touch with you? How would an audience, if someone wanted to speak with you or connect with you in the future? I know this is an extremely busy year and people have to be reasonable with this year, but I have a feeling that you're going to be impacting education for quite a few years to follow. That's why I asked that question. Just by some of the things that you said, how can people get in touch with you or contact you?
Well, right now on the ccsso.org website, there is actually a National Teacher of the Year page, and it's me, which is still crazy to see that. My fourth graders have figured out they can make that their homepage on their laptop, and I'll be honest, it still kind of weirds me out to see them open their laptop and there I am. But there's information how you can get in touch with me, how you can request me either for interviews or speaking engagements. I'm also on Twitter. And I recently started a National Teacher of the Year Instagram, although my daughter says I'm terrible at it and that we need to call it Latergram because there's nothing instant about it, but it will get on there eventually, and it will all be joyous. But any of those ways. So CCSSO has gone above and beyond to support me with absolutely everything I could ever dream of having. I asked them, where they were when I was raising children because the support is just amazing, and they are just wonderful.
Well, thank you so much, Missy. Like Chris said, this has just been a really wonderful and joyous conversation. Chris was a guest some time ago and came back as a guest for a second time and has now joined me as a co-host for a few weeks while my regular co-host Matt is spending time with his firstborn. And something I always appreciated about Chris, and it is radiating from you, is the love and joy of teaching. And that's why I thoroughly have enjoyed every conversation I've ever had with him. And I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation with you because I feel like I'm the one benefiting from this conversation more than anyone else, just seeing the joy, the love, and the knowledge, the experience, and the thorough effectiveness of pedagogy that you're using in your classroom as well. So I am very grateful for this conversation. So thank you again, Missy, so much. We will link up to everything that you mentioned in our show notes wherever you're watching or listening. If this is the first time you're listening to our podcast, we've had unbelievable conversations 168 times before this. We have had many State Teacher of the Year winners. We've had many State Teacher of the Year finalists on, as well as just a slew of other educators. So thank you again for your time. And Chris, why don't you take us on out of here?
Thank you, Missy, for your time. You've got a wonderful year ahead of you, and you're going to be a great advocate for the state, or for the country, and for education itself. I'm looking forward to seeing what you do. So as we power down tonight, this episode of Powered Up, I feel powered up and just generated and happy to go back to school tomorrow and enjoy a great day of school. But this program has given me that powered up feeling tonight. So thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. If you haven't already, please subscribe on whichever platform you're listening to or watching us on YouTube. Each week, we get to talk to amazing educators who are making a positive impact on the lives of students, their colleagues, administrators, and education as a whole. It's been such a privilege every week to be able to talk to these incredible individuals, learn from them, grow with them, and better myself and all of education through these conversations. If you haven't already, please consider sharing this with a colleague, someone who can benefit and be powered up from the experience of listening to these incredible conversations. Because of Powered Up, we are powering education by empowering you.